Welcome to the webinar, everyone. Week 11, if you can believe it. We're so glad you're still here with us as part of Recruitment Bootcamp. We're thrilled, as always, to have Ann Hogan with us. So we're going to give her a minute to get to the beginning of the slides and get off mute, and she's going to take us away for another 30 minutes of fun and learning together with the STAR Center.
Thank you, Allison. You just saved me because I was on mute and I couldn't figure out why. I heard you pop in. So now I hope everyone can hear me. We're going to start with the webinar housekeeping today. So we are recording. Be sure to ask questions in the chat if you have any. And most importantly, have fun, enjoy, and learn from this webinar today. What we're going to talk about is on-site visits, follow-up, and also contracting of providers. And I am the presenter today, so we'll skip that slide and go through our Recruitment Bootcamp goals, which we go through each time. One is we want to build relationships with each one of you, and we're really pleased that we're seeing a little more activity on the discussion board and relationships are being built. Again, build those processes of our recruitment toolkit and also build a strategy for recruitment. So that is our goal. And as we go through this recruitment planning process, we have completed a number of steps. The community, the team, the priorities, the important budget. We've discussed recruiting firms, advertising, social media, interviews. Today we're going to focus on contracts, on-site visits, and also follow-up. And next, December 13th, we're going to do onboarding. So if you've missed any of those, go back to the discussion board. There is links in each one of those to the webinars that maybe you missed. The discussion board is very easy to use. Just go to chcworkforce.org, select the 2017 Recruitment Bootcamp group, and select your relevant week. We are week 11 today. So, and comment and reply to others. And also you can upload documents to that if you find something that might be helpful that you use currently. Last week, Suzanne did a great presentation on the screening process. We talked about the importance of describing the position and identifying what the position needs actually before you screen applicants. Describing your health center, describing the region and the town in which you live when you're doing the screening process to make sure that that person is a good fit for your area. Asking questions. And I just want to bring up one question that was brought up on the discussion board, which was about behavioral interviewing. Now, behavioral interviewing is very important to include in your process, but the question surrounded is that people are familiar with behavioral interviewing, and so are you really getting accurate information when you're asking those questions? And there's kind of two ways you can go about that. One, make sure you're using the STAR method. So you're talking about the situation, the task, the action, and the result. And if you're not getting clear answers from your applicants on those 4 questions, revise how you're asking that question is one way that you can improve that process. Additionally, if they've given you a situation, an action, and a result, then be sure to talk to their references about if that is an accurate representation of how that situation was handled and dealt with by the applicant. So those are 2 keys that you can do when you're improving your skills at behavioral interviewing. And then also the review with your recruitment team on any applicants and their candidacy, how you rated them. Make sure you're doing that review with your recruitment team and identify who's on that team prior to starting the process. And again, if you want to replay any of the webinars that we've had, go to the discussion board and you can click on that. There's a YouTube link that will just pop right up for you. So before we get started though, we want to kind of find out where you're at. So we have some poll questions really quick. And I think Mariah is going to bring those up. So when responding to candidates, do you reach out via email? Because we're going to talk about selection today. Email, text, or phone. What do you actually use when you're responding to candidates? So we'll open that up for just a few more seconds. And then we've got another quick poll question. Wow, email is 100%, text is 56%, and phone is 100%. And text is becoming more appropriate to use when following up. Make sure that someone's okay with that. But those are great responses. Let's do one more. We actually have a total of 3 poll questions here. So when you reach out to candidates, is it within 24 hours, 48 hours, or longer? And that goes for not only when they first apply, but when you're also following up with them. How much time do you allow before you make sure you follow up? Again, we have 24, 48, or longer. All right, 24 hours is 30%, 48 hours is 70%, and longer is 0. I really like that result. Let's try to move the 48 hours to more the 24, 36-hour time frame, but those are really, really good. I'm glad to think that no one does it longer. That's fabulous. And one more question that we have that pertains to today. Who presents and negotiates your provider contracts? So who presents it to the provider and negotiates provider contracts? Your chief medical officer, your CEO, HR, or other. And that other could be your CFO. It could be a variety of people in your organization, maybe a vice president. But we'll talk about who's kind of the best to do that. Okay, your CMO is 10%, CEO is 50%. I have to say I'm rather surprised that HR is 40%, and then you also have other, which is 0. So I'm glad to see those results that the CEO and the CMO are at least participating in that process. With that, we will go to our next area and get started on today's webinar. And that's all good information that we have there. Let's see here. I'm having technology. You got to love it, right? It's so fabulous. We have to wait, I think, for the screen sharing to change back. But in the meantime, mine is not going forward. There we go. The site visit. So we're going to talk about the all-important site visit. You've gone through all of these steps, and now you actually have a provider that's going to come and do a site visit. So let's talk about the different areas that you need to identify when you're doing a site visit. This has to be a very organized process. So we're going to talk about your logistics, the visit itself, the partner itinerary, which means any significant other in their family or that they're a partner with, joint itinerary. So when you bring the partner together along with the candidate and what that itinerary looks like, and most important, the need to make the visit real. You don't want to represent something that your organization really isn't. That's probably one of the biggest failures we have when we do a site visit, is we want everyone to get this great impression of us, but it's not a real impression, even though we can be a really excellent organization. And Mariah, I am trying to, there we go, logistics and visit. So the logistics, who's making the trip? Who is actually going to come and visit the health center? Make sure that you're arranging the travel for them. Or if they are making their own reservations, who's actually paying for that? So you want to think about that ahead of time. Many times when you have a candidate who's coming on a trip, they don't have necessarily the ability to fork out, say, $700 in airfare and ground transportation and things like that. So do you have a process where you, the organization, can be billed for that trip? And then how long is that trip going to be? Where are they going to stay? Are they you're going to reserve a car for them and just allow them to go around the community? Or is it something where you picking them up and actually being in the car with them is more beneficial? It can be either way, but you need to think about those things beforehand, because when you start the logistics is when the candidate can see how organized and together and how much you want them to visit you. So sometimes if they feel like it's just kind of on their own and it's kind of whatever we want to do, that doesn't feel well with the candidate. They want to know that it's important to the organization to have them make the trip. So arrange cars or some type of transportation in advance. Hotel, where are they going to stay? Is it close to your health center? Is it in an adjoining town? Because some of you are in very small places. You may not have a hotel. Is there a bed and breakfast? Is there somewhere else that they can stay in town? Maybe a woman who opens up her home or a man who opens up their home to guests that are staying. So think about where it is that they're actually going to stay. How are their meals going to be handled? Is it going to be just at the hotel? Is it something that you're going to take them to lunch? And again, too often we make the mistake of, if, say, you're in an urban area and you have some high-end restaurant, that you want to take them out to that high-end restaurant. But maybe that's not really representative of your organization. So take them somewhere local that you normally eat. Take them, you might want to do something a little bit nicer, but certainly do not misrepresent to them that they are working for a nonprofit health center. In a situation that we had someone want to stay at a 4-star hotel. We decided very quickly that that was not the right candidate for us. So think about where you're going to have them stay and what kind of presentation you're going to have for them. Make sure they get directions and maps to not only your health center, but other places of interest. Is there a state park nearby? Where are the schools? Where are different organizations that they might be interested in? What else is happening in your community? Give them a little bit of the places of interest that they can utilize on their free time during your interview process. Give them directions to those different places. So make sure that they're integrated a little bit during that time. Sometimes we make those site visits so short that they never really get a feel for the organization and the community in which they'd actually be living in or nearby. When you do your visit, make sure you include a tour of your site or sites, and make sure that it's a day that you actually have something going on, right? So have them come, maybe on your busiest day of the week. Have them visit the local hospital, meet with the hospital administration, meet with other providers in the community at the hospital, whatever you can set up. And I know it sounds like an awful lot as we go through the site visit, but it pays off great dividends because they really get a feel for what's happening. Have a meeting arranged with the support staff that would be supporting this provider, other providers in the community, the CEO, the CMO, other people that are important to the organization, maybe your outreach workers, your nurses that you have on staff. Make sure that this person really finds out what the organization is about, and the people that are actually going to work with the provider get a real good feel for what, how this provider would actually fit in. They can be an invaluable resource for you long term. So the partner's itinerary, and to some extent, this should not be limited to the partner, whoever that is in their life, right? But it may be something that you also need to include the candidate on. But this is a good way if you're going to split the candidate and the partner up during the day, because the candidate's probably going to go visit the hospital, etc. The partner may want to visit schools in the area if they have children, or if they are planning on having children while they're in your community. So schools are a good idea. Daycare or child care options are huge. And so if they say have kids that would need daycare or child care, make sure that they have information about different providers that are in your community. Realtors and community members, make sure that they're meeting with those. Now, one thing that I will say about realtors and other community members is you want to make sure your realtors, and especially, are very up to date on what your health center does and is a true advocate for all the services that you provide. Because again, you're putting someone in a car, usually, to drive around in the community, and you're probably not with them, and you need to make sure that they're really going to advocate for your health center and the wonderful things you do in the community. So they're spending a significant amount of time with that person one-on-one, and you want to make sure that that person is very educated on their words and be an actual advocate for your health center, and they're a recruiting portion of the job to bring that person into the community. And then potential employers. I can't speak to how important this is. So when you are talking with your candidate, make sure you find out more about what the partner plans to do once they're in the community. Are they an engineer? Are they a nurse? Are they someone that stays home? What is their role? Are they an artist? Whatever they may do, you need to make sure that you're talking with potential employers and having them maybe set up a time when they can go toward that potential employer. Actually partner with those employers in your area to make sure that that partner has a job. There's a lot of people that lose candidates because the partner can't find a job or there's nothing appropriate for the partner to do in the community. So make sure you address that up front. The joint itinerary. Again, make sure you have a dinner or a meeting with providers and administrative staff. The candidate wants to make sure not only is the organization a fit for them, but is the organization a fit for their entire family? Is this something that the family agrees to do? As we know, many times the candidate is it's only a piece of making the decision whether or not they're going to come work for you. The partner is a significant decision maker in that also. So make sure that you're including them in meetings, not in the interview process necessarily. In fact, I'd recommend against that, but make sure that you're including them in that visit with dinners, meetings, potlucks, whatever it might be. Make sure that they're getting to know other people also. And then if you want, include them in a cultural or a unique community event that happens. Maybe there's a small town theater that happens to have cultural events, and have them go to that. Have them attend something within your community if you can. Maybe there's a flea market, maybe there's a farmer's market, maybe there's all sorts of things, right? And if you're in an urban area, maybe there's some more art appreciation things that they can do, or some type of games, whether it be a soccer game, etc., that they can attend, just to get a feel for what's really going on in the community. But think about all those different things that maybe we just don't think are that unique because we've maybe lived in the community for 30 years and it just happens every year. But those are important things to include your providers on. Now, once the applicant has applied, or you've finished the candidacy and decided what your decision is next, or you need to follow up with those candidates, make sure you develop a plan. So who is actually going to do the follow-up? If you don't get a response, who is going to be the next in line to do that? So on table 20, we talk about the sample candidate follow-up plan and also what it entails. So it entails your frequency, your timeline, your type of contact that you're going to have, and who is responsible. So the responsible party can be a number of different people. Maybe your frequency is that you're going to do it after 36 hours. I'll jump in between the 24 and 48. So at 36 hours, you're going to follow up with that candidate. It might be via phone. It might be followed up with an email. It might come from HR, since most of you are doing the negotiations. So it might be the CEO. But remember, you need to follow up. Whether it was a good visit or not, you always have to do that follow-up. So think about what frequency that is. And you also want to give that person time to actually absorb what they've seen and done within your community and what your organization is like. So give them some time, but also you might want to just follow up with thank you for coming. We'll be in touch later this week to discuss your visit in a further manner, and giving them time to actually process what they just experienced with you. And then again, that timeline is important. Make sure that they understand the timeline. Make sure that you understand what your timeline is, right? And the type of contact. Again, some people prefer text messages. I once recruited a dentist who was out in the middle of the Pacific on a boat, all via text message, because that was his only mode of communication. So it was all done through text. But again, I think an email is probably the best way after a phone call. So a phone call is always good, even if you're not going to reach the provider, and more than likely you actually won't, because remember, they're seeing patients, they're in clinic time, they may be on call at the hospital, but just having that personal voice on the phone is sometimes good, and then follow up with an email is always appropriate. And then who is actually going to do that? Identify, is it your CMO? Is it a joint email that's done from HR and your chief medical officer and possibly your CEO? Who is actually going to be responsible for doing that? And it's important to get that outlined, because if you don't outline at the beginning, everyone will assume that the other person did it, right? And so then a week has gone by and HR thinks that the CEO got a hold of somebody, the CEO thinks the CMO did, and ultimately you've lost the candidate. So it's really important that you identify who is responsible in that, in the follow-up. And then provider contracts. When we talk about provider contracts, now several of you actually do the negotiation of the contract. And it's important that whoever is doing the provider contracts, whoever is presenting it, does have some latitude if you are allowing anything to be negotiated. It's important that you know what, if a provider asks you a question on benefits, or can I get an additional week's vacation, or can you pay my COBRA insurance until your insurance goes into effect, things like that. Those kind of questions should be answered prior to having conversations with the provider, so you know what, I guess, latitude or what decision-making power you have. Because as a candidate, they want answers when they're on the phone with you, or they want answers via email. Now, there's some things that HR may not be able to have the latitude to make changes to certain parts of the contract, but make sure that whoever's negotiating that or presenting that knows kind of where they fall on that spectrum. If there's absolutely no, if you don't have the ability to make any decisions about it, or answer the questions that a provider may have, you may not be the right person to actually be presenting the contract. Or you may be presenting the contract and say to them, if you have any questions on any portions of this, give them the person of who they should contact. So that if it is the CEO, if it is the CMO, then make sure that they know that in advance, because that kind of puts you in HR or whoever is doing that negotiating, that they already kind of know that you're not the person that can actually negotiate. So that's a really important piece, because otherwise they get very frustrated. But your provider contract should include, at the minimum, your work expectations. What is expected of that provider? What are their clinic hours? What are their administrative hours? Do they have administrative hours? Are there on-call hours? So think about all of those things. That needs to be outlined in the contract. And of course, the contract should also give some flexibility on different areas, but make sure you're identifying some of these basic areas. Behavior. Now, as we've all seen in the news, behavior seems to be kind of dominating it. So make sure that you're not necessarily outlining everything in a behavior sense, but putting in at least a clause that says that anything that's detrimental to the organization, its patients, its staff, its reputation, etc., those, whatever the organization deems as detrimental, right? So make sure you're including some clause on the behavior that you expect from your providers going forward. Off-site, office sites, and location. Is it possible that maybe you hire them for one particular location, but sometimes they might need to fill in another location? And again, you don't want to get so particular on these details that then it kind of traps you and them into this contractual obligation. But it is certainly important that you say that if they may need to fill in at other locations. So they're not just tied to necessarily one, but it's based on the business needs of the organization on what location they may have to work at. And it's not all the time, especially if you're 50 miles apart, from location to location. But if you have several locations within a say a 30-mile radius, it's certainly appropriate. They may have to move between those locations. The call schedule. What is that call schedule? And of course, the call schedule can always change if you have a change from one provider to another provider, right? So if you lose a provider, the call schedule may increase. If you gain another provider, the call schedule may decrease. So again, you want to write the provider contract that's fair for not only the provider and for yourself as the organization, but you don't want to get so detailed that, again, the provider says, I'm only on call 3 days a week. I'm sorry, you need me 4. Okay, so you need to be clear and make it flexible for everybody. Compensation and benefits. Boy, that's always a tough one, isn't it? Compensation is always a big deal. So think about, what is your compensation plan? Do you have a base salary and different incentives? Do you have incentives for quality, for different metrics, patient satisfaction, or internal administrative task completion, including expectations? Do you have year-end bonuses? If you have any of those other compensation methods besides a base salary, make sure that you're able to actually report to the provider in a timely manner why they did or did not achieve that bonus, and make sure that they're up to date throughout the year. When you give bonuses or you have incentives, you need to make sure that you also have in process a way to actually make that fair to them, in the sense of providing the actual accounting and reporting behind those numbers. Are you including professional development or other benefits in their compensation program? We all want vacation and sick leave and health insurance, etc. And how many days professional development are they going to get? Is that going to be paid? Is that part of vacation? What does that look like? What are the expenses that they're able to take? So if they have expenses for, say, a cell phone, do you provide that for them? Do you provide different websites that they can access different medical information from? What expenses are allowed? What a moving allowance is allowed? When you actually talk about bringing someone to your organization, are you allowing a flat amount? Are you allowing a huge United van truck lines? Are you allowing, just reimbursed expenses? But all of those things need to be outlined. And then, of course, the all-important termination clause. None of us want to think that we want to have to terminate someone, but at the same time, we need to make sure that there is some way that we can part ways, both on the candidate's part and on the organization's part, that makes sense for everyone. So make sure that that's also included. Now, for next week, we'll have you complete table 19 and 20, which is the outline of who's responsible for what areas in the candidate follow-up plan. Have you complete discussion board questions? If you haven't, there's some really good information on there, and make sure that you contribute to that. We'd appreciate that. The next webinar is December 13th, which is in 2 weeks. We'll talk about onboarding. And then again, office hours start again next Wednesday, December 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Just go to the same sign-in and ask away. So if you have questions that maybe you don't want to put on the discussion board, be sure you call. Mariah, Suzanne, and myself will all be on the call that day, waiting to have you give us a call. Now the faculty is Allison, Mariah, myself, and Suzanne. All of our emails are there. Feel free to email us at any time during the next month or so with any questions that you may have. Additionally, you may have heard that all of us have reached out to different health centers to try to get your feedback for future cohorts in the recruitment boot camp. And so if you haven't gotten back to one of us, please do so. And you can just do that via email or give us a call, however you feel comfortable. But we'd love your feedback on how this has gone. So make sure that you let us know. Now, again, the next webinar is onboarding and a wrap-up. And Allison is going to do that. And I know it'll be absolutely fantastic. And again, if you have any questions, just let us know, because again, we have emails. The webinar recordings are all on the discussion board under each week. We've revisited that. If you haven't gone to the discussion board in a while, it's no longer labeled with the week numbers, but also in describing the week, so you kind of have an idea of where you want to target if you missed a particular webinar. Assignment and discussion board prompts, make sure you give us a call on December 6th if you'd like to. And with that, you are done for